My name is Marcus Rivera, and at 32, I never imagined I'd be fighting to relearn how to walk while my family was busy planning the perfect engagement party. When I had my stroke on a Tuesday morning in Phoenix, I thought surely this would be the wake-up call that brought my family together. Instead, I spent 3 months in rehabilitation completely alone, watching other patients receive daily visits while I stared at empty chairs. It took my physical therapist Sarah threatening to call Adult Protective Services for my parents to finally realize they had a son lying in a hospital bed just 20 minutes from their Scottsdale mansion. That phone call changed everything between us, but not in the way you might expect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the older son in the Rivera family meant living with expectations that somehow never quite applied to me the way they did to my younger sister Jessica. Our family ran Rivera and Associates Real Estate, one of the most successful firms in the Phoenix metropolitan area. My father Robert had built the business from nothing after immigrating from Mexico in his 20s, working construction during the day and studying for his real estate license at night. My mother Linda came from a family of educators but threw herself into supporting the business, eventually becoming the firm's operations manager. They were hardworking people who had achieved the American dream, and their success was evident in our large home in a gated Scottsdale community, complete with a pool, 3-car garage, and views of Camelback Mountain. Jessica was born when I was 3, and from her earliest years it was clear she possessed something I lacked. She had an intuitive understanding of people, a natural charm that made clients feel comfortable and confident in their real estate decisions. Even as a child, she would accompany our parents to open houses, chatting easily with potential buyers while I sat quietly in the corner with a book. Where I was analytical and cautious, Jessica was spontaneous and persuasive. Where I asked detailed questions about contracts and market trends, Jessica focused on the emotional aspects of helping families find their dream homes. Our parents recognized her gift early and began grooming her to eventually take over the family business. This wasn't necessarily presented as favoritism, more as practical business sense. Jessica was clearly the natural successor to Rivera and Associates, while I showed more aptitude for the analytical side of finance and risk assessment. When I expressed interest in joining the family business after college, my father gently suggested I might be happier in a field that better suited my strengths. He helped me secure a position at Southwestern Insurance Solutions, where my attention to detail and conservative approach to risk made me successful in commercial insurance. It was meaningful work, and I was good at it, but it also meant I was permanently positioned outside the family's primary focus. Family dinners often centered around real estate market conditions, upcoming listings, and Jessica's latest successes with difficult clients. I would contribute when I could, offering insights about insurance considerations or market analysis, but the conversation inevitably returned to Jessica's natural talent for connecting with people. When she sold her first $1 million property at 25, our parents threw a celebration dinner at the Phoenician resort. When I received a promotion to senior account manager the same year, they took me to lunch at a nice restaurant and told me they were proud of my steady progress. The disparity wasn't malicious, but it was consistent. Jessica's achievements were celebrated as family victories, while mine were acknowledged as personal accomplishments. She was building the Rivera legacy, while I was simply building a career. Over time, I internalized this dynamic and stopped expecting equal treatment. I focused on excelling in my own field, buying my own home in Tempe, and building a life that didn't require constant validation from my family. I told myself I preferred the independence, but deep down, I never stopped hoping they would see me as more than just Jessica's responsible older brother. 3 years ago, during a routine physical exam, my doctor expressed concern about my blood pressure readings. At 39, the numbers were higher than they should be, and combined with our family history of cardiovascular issues, he recommended lifestyle changes and regular monitoring. When I mentioned this to my parents during one of our monthly family dinners, my mother's response was dismissive. "You work too much and worry too much, Marcus. Just relax more and exercise." My father nodded in agreement. "Your grandfather lived to 92, and he never worried about his blood pressure. These doctors today want to medicate everything." I tried to explain that hypertension was a serious risk factor for stroke and heart disease, especially given our family history, but they seemed more annoyed than concerned. "You're only 39, my mother said with a wave of her hand. "You're being paranoid." Jessica, who was planning her engagement at the time, looked up from her phone where she was scrolling through wedding venues. Marcus has always been a hypochondriac, she added casually. Remember when he thought he had appendicitis in high school, and it was just stress from finals? Their dismissal stung, but it wasn't entirely surprising. Throughout my 20s, any mention of health concerns or stress was met with suggestions that I was overreacting or seeking attention. When I experienced severe stomach pain during a particularly busy period at work, they attributed it to my tendency to worry rather than considering it might be legitimate. When I mentioned feeling exhausted despite getting adequate sleep, they suggested I was working too hard by choice, rather than considering underlying health issues. The pattern was clear: Jessica's concerns were taken seriously, while mine were dismissed as anxiety or attention-seeking behavior. Despite their skepticism, I took my doctor's advice seriously. I started exercising regularly, modified my diet, and began taking medication to control my blood pressure. I scheduled regular checkups and monitored my numbers carefully. My efforts seemed to be paying off, and for nearly 2 years my condition remained stable. I felt vindicated in my caution, even if my family continued to view it as unnecessary worry. Meanwhile, Jessica's life was reaching new heights of success and excitement. She had been dating Andrew Mitchell, a successful attorney, for 3 years, and their relationship had become another source of family pride. Andrew came from a prominent Phoenix family, and his proposal was everything my parents had hoped for their daughter. The engagement ring was stunning, the proposal was romantic and elaborate, and the celebration that followed was befitting of what my mother called the social event of the year. The engagement party planning consumed my family's attention for months. My mother took a leave of absence from the real estate office to focus on coordinating vendors, managing guest lists, and ensuring every detail met their high standards. My father leveraged his business connections to secure the perfect venue and negotiate favorable rates with caterers and photographers. Just
preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Jessica threw herself into the planning with characteristic enthusiasm, viewing it as an opportunity to showcase not just her engagement but the success and status of the Rivera family. The party was scheduled for a Saturday evening in late September at the Phoenician Resort, the same venue where they had celebrated Jessica's first major real estate sale. The guest list included over 200 people, family friends, business associates, clients, and members of Phoenix's social and business elite. My parents spoke of nothing else during family gatherings, debating menu selections, discussing seating arrangements, and reviewing every aspect of the evening's timeline. As the date approached, my role in the celebration became increasingly unclear. I was obviously invited, expected to attend, and asked to contribute financially to certain aspects of the party. However, I wasn't included in the planning discussions, wasn't asked for input on major decisions, and wasn't given any specific responsibilities for the event. When I offered to help with logistics or coordination, my mother politely declined, explaining that they had everything under control. When I suggested contributing more significantly to the costs, my father assured me that my modest contribution was sufficient and appreciated. The week before the engagement party, I began experiencing unusual symptoms. Severe headaches that seemed different from typical stress headaches, occasional dizziness when standing up quickly, and a strange tingling sensation in my left hand that came and went unpredictably. I attributed these symptoms to work stress and the busy fall season in commercial insurance, where many clients were reviewing their coverage before the end of the fiscal year. I increased my medication dosage slightly, as my doctor had previously approved, and tried to get more rest. On the Monday before Jessica's Saturday engagement party, I mentioned my symptoms during a brief phone call with my mother. She was in the middle of finalizing arrangements with the florist, and seemed distracted by my concerns. "Marcus, you always get worked up before big family events," she said impatiently. "Just take some aspirin and try to relax. We need you to be in good spirits for Saturday. The party is really important to Jessica, and we can't have you bringing down the mood with health anxieties." I was hurt by her dismissal but not surprised. The pattern of minimizing my concerns was well established, and I had learned not to expect different treatment. I decided to push through the symptoms and focus on being supportive during what was clearly a significant moment for my sister and parents. I took time off work Friday to help with any last-minute preparations they might need, though no one had specifically asked for my assistance. Tuesday morning started like any other workday. I arrived at Southwestern Insurance Solutions by 8 o'clock, prepared for a busy day of client meetings and policy reviews. By 10 o'clock, my headache had intensified to a level I had never experienced before. The pain was sharp and focused, unlike the dull aches I sometimes experienced during stressful periods. I took ibuprofen and tried to continue working, but concentration became increasingly difficult. Around 11:30, while reviewing a complex commercial policy with a client, I noticed my speech beginning to slur slightly. Words that should have come easily required extra effort to pronounce clearly. My client, a longtime business contact, asked if I was feeling all right. I assured him I was fine, just tired, but privately I was becoming concerned. The tingling in my left hand had intensified, and I was having trouble gripping my pen properly. David Thompson, my closest colleague and cubicle neighbor, noticed my distress when I stood up abruptly and swayed slightly. "Marcus, you look terrible," he said, standing up to steady me. "What's going on?" I tried to explain that I was experiencing some unusual symptoms, but my words came out garbled and confused. David's expression changed from concern to alarm. "We need to call 911 right now," he said, reaching for his phone. "You're having a stroke." The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency medical activity. The paramedics arrived quickly, conducting rapid neurological assessments and starting an IV while preparing me for transport to Phoenix General Medical Center. David rode with me in the ambulance, calling my parents from my phone to inform them of the emergency. He later told me that my mother's initial response was to ask if this could wait until after the weekend, since they were so busy with final party preparations. When David explained that I was having a stroke and was being taken to the hospital immediately, she said they would try to get there as soon as they could manage it. The emergency room physicians confirmed David's assessment. I had suffered an ischemic stroke, caused by a blood clot that had blocked circulation to a portion of my brain. The quick recognition and treatment had prevented more severe damage, but I was experiencing weakness on my left side, continued speech difficulties, and some cognitive confusion. The medical team explained that the next 72 hours would be critical for determining the extent of permanent damage and beginning the rehabilitation process. Dr. Williams, the neurologist overseeing my care, emphasized the importance of family support during stroke recovery. "Studies show that patients with strong family involvement have significantly better outcomes," he explained to David, who had stayed with me throughout the emergency room evaluation. "Is his family here yet?" David looked uncomfortable. "They're dealing with some family obligations, but they should be here soon." Dr. Williams nodded, noting the information in my chart, but his expression suggested he found the delay concerning. I spent Tuesday night in the intensive care unit, drifting in and out of consciousness, while medical staff monitored my vital signs and neurological responses. David stayed until visiting hours ended, promising to return the next day and to keep trying to reach my family. When I woke up Wednesday morning, my first clear thought was wondering why my parents and Jessica hadn't come to see me. I asked the nurse if anyone had called or visited during the night. She checked her records and shook her head sympathetically. "Just your friend David," she said. "But I'm sure your family will be here soon." Wednesday afternoon brought my first attempt at sitting up independently, a task that had never required conscious thought but now demanded every ounce of my concentration and strength. The left side of my body felt foreign and unresponsive, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. My speech remained slurred and halting, each word requiring deliberate effort to form correctly. The nursing staff was encouraging but realistic about the challenges ahead. Physical therapy would begin as soon as I was medically stable, they explained, and the recovery process would likely take months of intensive work. David returned during visiting hours, bringing a small care package from our colleagues at Southwestern Insurance Solutions. His face showed the strain of the past 24 hours, and I could tell he was struggling with how to address the obvious absence of my family. "Have you heard from your parents or Jessica?" he asked carefully. I shook my head, the simple movement causing a wave of dizziness. He pulled out his phone and tried calling them again, leaving another message explaining my condition and the hospital's location. The call was returned an hour later, not by my parents but by Jessica. David stepped into the hallway to take the call, and when he returned, his expression was a mixture of disbelief and barely contained anger. "She said they're incredibly busy with final preparations for the engagement party," he reported, his voice tight with restraint. "Apparently the caterer is threatening to cancel because of some miscommunication about the menu, and they can't leave to deal with problems right now. She asked if you're stable and said they'll try to visit after the weekend if you're still here." If I'm still here, the casual nature of that phrase hit me like a physical blow. I was lying in a hospital bed, having suffered a stroke that could have killed me or left me permanently disabled, and my sister was treating my presence in the hospital as a temporary inconvenience that might resolve itself by the weekend. David saw the pain in my expression and quickly tried to soften the impact of Jessica's words. "I'm sure she didn't mean it the way it sounded," he said unconvincingly. "They're probably just overwhelmed and not thinking clearly." But I knew better. This wasn't about being overwhelmed or thinking clearly. This was about priorities, and I had never been a priority for my family. Even now, when I was facing the most serious medical crisis of my life, their attention remained focused on what they considered more important. The engagement party represented everything they valued: social status, business connections, and Jessica's happiness. My stroke represented everything they preferred to avoid: inconvenience, medical complexity, and attention directed away from their chosen focus. Thursday brought the beginning of my rehabilitation assessment. Sarah Chen, the physical therapist assigned to my case, was a petite woman in her early 30s, with a no-nonsense approach that I found both intimidating and reassuring. She evaluated my mobility, coordination, and strength with professional efficiency, making notes on a tablet while explaining each test. "The damage isn't as extensive as it could have been," she said after completing her assessment. "You'll need intensive therapy, but there's every reason to be optimistic about significant recovery." The occupational therapist, James Rodriguez, conducted similar evaluations of my cognitive function and daily living skills. Simple tasks like buttoning a shirt or writing my name had become monumentally difficult, requiring concentration and effort that left me exhausted. Both therapists emphasized the importance of family involvement in the recovery process. "We like to train family members in exercises and techniques they can help with at home," Sarah explained. "When will your family be available to meet with us?" I felt embarrassed explaining that my family was unavailable due to party planning obligations. Sarah's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught a brief flash of something that might have been disapproval. "That's fine," she said diplomatically. "We can work with whoever is available as your primary support person." David immediately volunteered, despite having no legal relationship to me and his own work obligations. Sarah scheduled him for a family training session the following week, treating him with the same respect and attention she would have given my blood relatives. Friday evening, as I struggled through basic physical therapy exercises in my hospital bed, I could hear the sounds of celebration from somewhere outside my window. Phoenix General Medical Center was located just a few miles from the Phoenician Resort, and I wondered if the distant music and laughter might be drifting from Jessica's engagement party. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was learning to lift my left arm above my head, my family was raising champagne glasses in celebration of Jessica's future. David had offered to skip the party and stay with me, but I insisted he go home and rest. He had already sacrificed too much of his time and energy on my behalf, and I didn't want him to feel obligated to fill the void left by my family's absence. After he left, I lay in the dim hospital room, listening to the distant sounds of celebration and trying to reconcile myself to the reality of my situation. I was beginning a long and difficult recovery journey, and I would be traveling it essentially alone. Saturday night, while my family celebrated at the Phoenician Resort, I suffered a secondary complication that sent me back to the intensive care unit. My blood pressure spiked dangerously, causing severe headaches and raising concerns about additional brain damage. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize my condition, adjusting medications and monitoring my neurological status throughout the night. When I regained consciousness Sunday morning, Dr. Williams explained that I had experienced what they called a rebound episode, not uncommon after stroke, but requiring extended observation and modified treatment. The setback meant my hospital stay would be longer than originally anticipated, and my rehabilitation timeline would need to be adjusted. Dr. Williams recommended transferring me to Desert Springs Rehabilitation Facility, a specialized stroke recovery center, as soon as I was medically stable. The facility offered intensive daily therapy and was better equipped for the long-term recovery process I would need. However, he emphasized again the importance of family involvement and support during this transition. Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected visit from Mrs. Patricia Gonzalez, my elderly neighbor from my apartment complex in Tempe. She had heard about my hospitalization from David, who had gone to my apartment to collect some personal items. Mrs. Gonzalez was a retired nurse who had always been kind to me, occasionally bringing me homemade tamales and checking on me during particularly busy work periods. Seeing her familiar face in the hospital room nearly brought me to tears. Mijo, she said, using the affectionate term she had always called me, where is your familia? David told me what happened, but surely they are here with you now. I had to explain, with halting speech and obvious embarrassment, that my family was dealing with other obligations and hadn't been able to visit yet. Mrs. Gonzalez's expression darkened with disapproval. This is not right, she said firmly. Family should be here when you are sick. This is not the way we treat people we love. Her words cut deep because they articulated what I had been trying not to acknowledge. If my family truly loved me, they would have found a way to be here. Engagement parties could be postponed or managed by others. Business obligations could be delegated. The only explanation for their complete absence was that my health and well-being simply weren't important enough to them to justify changing their plans or priorities. Mrs. Gonzalez stayed for 2 hours, helping me with basic tasks like drinking water and adjusting my pillows. She brought news from my apartment building and promised to water my plants and collect my mail while I was hospitalized. As she prepared to leave, she squeezed my hand gently. I will come back tomorrow, she promised. And I will call your family myself if they don't come soon. This is not acceptable. Monday morning brought my transfer to Desert Springs Rehabilitation Facility, a modern building designed specifically for stroke and brain injury recovery. My room was larger and more comfortable than the hospital, with space for family members to stay during visits and participate in therapy sessions. The irony of the family-friendly accommodations wasn't lost on me, given that I would be experiencing them alone. Sarah Chen had transferred with me to continue my physical therapy, and I was grateful for the continuity. She introduced me to the rehabilitation team, Dr. Martinez, the physiatrist overseeing my care, Lisa Park, my speech therapist, and several other specialists who would be working with me over the coming weeks. The intensity of the program was immediately apparent. I would have therapy sessions 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, focusing on regaining mobility, speech, and cognitive function. The first week of rehabilitation was brutally difficult. Tasks that had been automatic for 32 years now required conscious effort and frequent rest breaks. Walking 10 feet left me exhausted. Forming complete sentences demanded concentration that gave me headaches. Writing my name looked like the work of a child just learning to hold a pencil. The other patients in the facility had various levels of family support, and I couldn't help but notice the difference it made in their progress and morale. During my second week at Desert Springs, I finally received my first visit from my family. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after my stroke, looking tanned and relaxed, from what I learned was a post-engagement party vacation in Sedona. My mother carried a small bouquet of flowers from a grocery store, and my father held a generic get-well card. Jessica trailed behind them, checking her phone and looking mildly inconvenienced by the hospital setting. Marcus, darling, my mother said, air kissing near my cheek, to avoid disturbing the various medical equipment around my bed. You gave us quite a scare.
Oh!
We came as soon as we could manage it. Did you? I asked, my speech still slow and deliberate but clearer than it had been the previous week. I've been here for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, my father repeated, as if he hadn't been counting the days. Well, you know how it is. The engagement party was such a success, and then we had some business obligations we couldn't postpone. We're here now though, and that's what matters. Jessica looked around the rehabilitation facility, with obvious discomfort. This place is depressing, she said bluntly. When will you be able to come home? The question revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of stroke recovery. I wouldn't be coming home for weeks, possibly months. Even when I was discharged, I would need ongoing therapy and support for basic daily activities. The Jessica who had always been the center of family attention couldn't comprehend a situation where someone else's needs might take priority for an extended period. My mother changed the subject to safer ground, chattering about the success of the engagement party and the positive response from their social circle. The Phoenician outdid themselves with the service, she gushed. And Jessica's speech about Andrew was absolutely perfect. Everyone said it was the most elegant engagement celebration they'd ever attended. She showed me photos on her phone, images of Jessica radiant in a designer gown, my parents beaming with pride, and hundreds of guests celebrating in the beautiful resort setting. One photo particularly struck me. It showed my parents raising champagne glasses in a toast, laughing joyously with friends and business associates. The timestamp indicated it was taken Saturday evening around 9 o'clock, approximately the same time I was being moved back to intensive care due to my blood pressure crisis. While I was fighting to prevent additional brain damage, my family was posing for photos and accepting congratulations on Jessica's engagement. I asked them about their vacation to Sedona, and they enthusiastically described hiking trails, spa treatments, and gourmet restaurants. They had needed to decompress after the stress of party planning, my father explained, and Sedona was the perfect place to relax and celebrate Jessica's engagement in a more intimate setting. The vacation had lasted 5 days, during which they had turned off their phones to fully disconnect from business pressures and enjoy family time together. The irony was overwhelming. They had needed family time to recover from the stress of party planning, but they hadn't needed family time to support me through the most challenging period of my life. They had found it essential to disconnect from outside pressures while celebrating Jessica's engagement, but they hadn't found it necessary to connect with me while I struggled to relearn basic human functions. The visit lasted exactly 45 minutes. Jessica became restless after 20 minutes, checking her phone repeatedly and making comments about traffic and dinner reservations. My mother ran out of party stories and seemed unsure how to interact with me in a medical setting. My father appeared uncomfortable with the clinical environment and the obvious reality of my condition. When they left, promising to visit again soon, I felt more isolated than I had during the 2 weeks of their complete absence. Sarah Chen found me in my room an hour later, staring out the window
At the desert landscape, she sat down in the chair my family had vacated and studied my expression with professional concern. "How are you feeling about the visit?" she asked gently. I tried to formulate an honest response, but the words felt too complex for my still recovering speech abilities. "Disappointed," I finally managed to say. She nodded understandingly. "That's a normal reaction. Family dynamics can be complicated, especially when illness changes the usual patterns." Over the following weeks, my family's visits became sporadic and brief. They would arrive with little advance notice, stay for 30 to 60 minutes, and leave as soon as the conversation became uncomfortable or I showed signs of fatigue. They brought impersonal gifts, generic magazines, chocolate I couldn't eat due to dietary restrictions, and flowers that wilted quickly in the dry hospital air. Their visits felt obligatory rather than motivated by genuine concern or affection. During my 3rd week at Desert Springs, I overheard a conversation between my parents in the hallway outside my room. They hadn't realized the door was partially open, and their voices carried clearly into my room. "I can't stay much longer," my father was saying irritably. "I have that meeting with the Henderson clients about their commercial property portfolio." "Well, I can't stay either," my mother replied. "Jessica needs help looking at wedding venues this afternoon. She wants to book something before the best dates are taken." "He's an adult, Linda," my father continued. "He doesn't need us hovering over him constantly. The therapists are doing their job, and he's making progress. Jessica's wedding planning is time-sensitive, and she needs our support during this exciting time." I know, my mother agreed. "We'll just check in with him for a few more minutes and then head out. He probably wants to rest anyway." They entered my room with bright, artificial smiles and spent exactly 12 more minutes asking superficial questions about my therapy progress and making encouraging comments about my recovery. They left with promises to return soon, but their next visit wouldn't occur for another 10 days. During that interval, I would make significant progress in my rehabilitation, celebrate small victories alone, and work through setbacks without family support. The contrast with other patients' experiences became increasingly apparent. Mrs. Rodriguez, who was recovering from a stroke similar to mine, received daily visits from her adult children. They attended therapy sessions, learned exercises to help with her home recovery, and provided emotional support during difficult moments. Mr. Johnson, a younger man with a traumatic brain injury, had a wife who practically lived at the facility, sleeping in the family room, and participating in every aspect of his care. Sarah Chen began to notice the disparity as well. During my 4th week of rehabilitation, she asked to speak with me privately about my discharge planning. "Most stroke patients return home to family support," she explained. "Someone needs to be available to help with daily activities, transportation to outpatient therapy, and emergency situations. Do you have family members who can provide that level of assistance?"
I had to admit that my family would likely not be available for intensive caregiving. They had demanding careers, social obligations, and Jessica's wedding planning to manage. I lived alone in a second-floor apartment with no elevator, which would be problematic given my mobility limitations. The reality of my situation was becoming clear. I would need to navigate my recovery largely on my own, despite medical recommendations for family support and assistance. Dr. Martinez, my rehabilitation physician, expressed similar concerns during our weekly progress meeting. Your recovery is going well, but stroke rehabilitation is a long-term process that extends far beyond your stay here, he explained. Research consistently shows that patients with strong family support systems have better outcomes and lower rates of depression and setbacks. We need to ensure you have adequate support in place before discharge. The conversation forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my family relationships. They weren't intentionally cruel or malicious. They simply had other priorities that took precedence over my needs, even during a medical crisis. Their lives revolved around business success, social status, and Jessica's happiness. I had never been central to those concerns, and my stroke hadn't changed that fundamental dynamic. The realization was painful but also clarifying. I had spent years hoping that someday my family would see me as essential, that some crisis or achievement would finally earn me the attention and support they gave Jessica automatically. My stroke had provided the ultimate test of those hopes, and the results were undeniable. Even when I was fighting to recover from a life-threatening medical emergency, I remained peripheral to their concerns. During my 5th week at Desert Springs, David Thompson had become my most consistent visitor and advocate. He attended family training sessions, learned physical therapy techniques, and volunteered to help with my transition home. His dedication embarrassed and touched me in equal measure. You don't have to do this, I told him during one of his visits. You have your own life and responsibilities. He shook his head firmly. That's what friends do, Marcus. They show up when it matters. His simple statement highlighted everything that was missing from my family relationships. They hadn't shown up when it mattered most. They had prioritized party planning over my medical emergency, vacation relaxation over my rehabilitation, and wedding preparations over my recovery needs. The pattern was clear and undeniable, even if acknowledging it was emotionally devastating. Sarah Chen's growing concern about my family situation reached a turning point during my 6th week of rehabilitation. She had observed my isolation, witnessed the sporadic and superficial family visits, and recognized the potential impact on my recovery prospects. During one of our physical therapy sessions, she asked direct questions about my discharge planning and family support that I couldn't deflect or minimize. Marcus, I need to be honest with you, she said, pausing our walking exercise to face me directly. I'm concerned about your support system at home. Stroke recovery requires ongoing assistance with daily activities, transportation to therapy appointments, and emergency support. Your family visits are infrequent and brief, and they don't seem to be preparing for the level of involvement your recovery will require. I tried to defend my family, explaining their busy schedules and important obligations, but Sarah's expression remained serious. I understand that people have responsibilities, she said carefully, but stroke recovery is a family emergency that typically requires adjustments to normal routines and priorities. The level of involvement I'm seeing from your family is concerning from a medical and safety standpoint. Her professional assessment forced me to acknowledge what I had been trying to deny. My family wasn't going to provide the support I needed for recovery. They had made that clear through their actions over the past 6 weeks. The question now was what to do with that information, and how to protect myself from further disappointment and potential harm to my recovery process. Sarah's next words would change everything. Marcus, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you deserve honesty and proper care. If your family isn't going to be available to support your recovery, we need to explore other options. That might include extended rehabilitation, assisted living arrangements, or in some cases, adult protective services intervention to ensure you have adequate support and safety measures in place. The mention of adult protective services sent a chill through me. I had never considered that my family's neglect might rise to the level requiring official intervention. But as I reflected on the past 6 weeks, their behavior patterns became harder to defend. They had ignored a medical emergency, skipped crucial weeks of my recovery, and shown no interest in preparing for my ongoing care needs. From an outside perspective, it might indeed look like neglect or abandonment of a vulnerable family member. That evening, I lay in my rehabilitation facility bed thinking about Sarah's words and the implications of my situation. Tomorrow would bring another day of intensive therapy, another small step toward recovery, and another reminder of my family's absence. But it might also bring a conversation that would finally force them to confront the consequences of their choices and priorities. For the first time since my stroke, I began to consider that maybe I deserved better treatment than what I had been accepting from the people who claimed to love me. The morning of my 7th week at Desert Springs Rehabilitation Facility brought an unexpected development that would force my family to confront their neglect in ways they couldn't dismiss or rationalize away. Sarah Chen arrived for our physical therapy session, carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression more serious than I had seen during our weeks of working together. She closed the door to my room and sat down in the visitor's chair, positioning herself at eye level with me as I sat on the edge of my bed. "Marcus, I need to discuss something important with you," she began, her voice carrying the weight of professional responsibility. "Over the past several weeks, I've been documenting your progress and your support system as part of your medical record. While your physical recovery has been excellent, I'm deeply concerned about the pattern of family involvement I've observed. In my 15 years as a physical therapist, I've never seen such consistent absence from family members during a stroke patient's rehabilitation." She opened her clipboard and showed me documentation I hadn't realized she was keeping. Visit logs showing the sporadic timing and brief duration of my family's appearances. Notes about their lack of participation in education sessions about my ongoing care needs. Observations about their apparent discomfort with my medical condition and rehabilitation requirements. The clinical documentation painted a stark picture of neglect that was difficult to argue with or explain away. "Your family has missed every scheduled family education session," Sarah continued. "They haven't asked questions about your home exercise program, your dietary restrictions, or your ongoing therapy needs. They show no awareness of your discharge timeline or the level of assistance you'll require at home. From a medical standpoint, this level of disengagement is concerning enough that I'm required to consider protective interventions." The phrase protective interventions hung in the air between us like a thunderclap. I had heard of adult protective services, but never imagined it might apply to my situation. In my mind, APS was for elderly people being financially exploited or disabled individuals being physically abused. The idea that my family's emotional neglect and practical abandonment might constitute a form of harm requiring official intervention had never occurred to me. Sarah must have seen the shock in my expression because she leaned forward and spoke more gently. "This isn't about punishment or blame, Marcus. This is about ensuring you have the support you need for safe recovery. Stroke patients who attempt to manage their rehabilitation alone have significantly higher rates of falls, medication errors, depression, and setbacks. Your discharge plan currently shows you living alone in a second-floor apartment with no elevator, no family assistance, and no emergency support system. That's not medically advisable." I tried to defend my family again, offering explanations about their busy schedules and important obligations, but Sarah interrupted me with quiet firmness. "Marcus, I need you to hear something clearly. Your stroke was a life-threatening medical emergency. Your rehabilitation is a months-long process requiring intensive support. If your family considers party planning and vacation trips more important than your recovery, that's information you need to accept and plan around, not information you need to keep making excuses for." Her words forced me to confront a reality I had been avoiding for weeks. My family's behavior wasn't explainable by busy schedules or competing priorities. It represented a fundamental difference in how they valued my well-being compared to other aspects of their lives. They had made conscious choices about where to invest their time and emotional energy, and I consistently ranked below business obligations, social events, and Jessica's happiness. Sarah continued with her professional assessment. "I'm going to be calling your family today to discuss your discharge planning and their role in your ongoing care. If they're unable or unwilling to provide appropriate support, we'll need to explore alternative arrangements. That might include extended rehabilitation, assisted living placement, or formal support services. In cases where family members are available but choosing not to participate in necessary care, Adult protective services may need to be involved to ensure adequate safety measures. The thought of APS contacting my family filled me with a complex mixture of embarrassment and vindication. Part of me was mortified that my family relationships had deteriorated to the point where medical professionals considered intervention necessary. Another part of me felt relieved that someone with authority was finally acknowledging the inadequacy of their support and taking steps to address it. Sarah scheduled the family meeting for Thursday afternoon, giving my parents and Jessica 3 days' notice to arrange their schedules. The call would be mandatory, she explained, as it was a required part of discharge planning for stroke patients. She would be documenting their responses and using that information to determine appropriate next steps for my care coordination. Wednesday evening brought an unexpected visit from Jessica, who arrived looking agitated and defensive. She had obviously received Sarah's call and was not pleased about the mandatory family meeting. "Marcus, what did you say to your physical therapist about us?" she demanded without any pleasantries or concern about my health. "She called saying we're required to attend some meeting about your discharge planning, or she's going to involve social services. That's completely ridiculous and embarrassing." I explained that I hadn't complained about them to Sarah, but that she had been observing our family dynamics and was concerned about my support system for recovery. Jessica's response revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of both my condition and her obligations as family. "You're getting better, aren't you?" she said impatiently. "I mean, you're walking around and talking normally. Why do you need us to babysit you when you're obviously fine?" Her characterization of my recovery as being obviously fine demonstrated how little attention she had paid to my actual condition. Yes, I could walk short distances with assistance. Yes, my speech had improved significantly from the first week. But I still experienced severe fatigue, balance problems, cognitive challenges, and weakness on my left side. Simple activities like grocery shopping, cooking, or climbing stairs remained difficult or impossible. The idea that I was obviously fine revealed either willful ignorance or deliberate minimization of my ongoing struggles. I tried to explain the realities of stroke recovery, but Jessica cut me off with visible frustration. "Look, Marcus, I'm sorry you're dealing with this health thing, but the timing is terrible. Andrew and I are trying to plan our wedding. I'm taking over more responsibilities at the real estate office, and Mom and Dad are incredibly busy with year-end business obligations. We can't just drop everything to hover over you when you're clearly recovering well." The phrase "health thing" to describe my stroke was particularly revealing. It reduced a life-threatening medical emergency and ongoing disability to a minor inconvenience that I was choosing to make dramatic. Her reference to dropping everything suggested that any assistance with my recovery would require unreasonable sacrifices on their part, rather than normal family support during a medical crisis. Jessica's visit lasted only 20 minutes, but it accomplished something important for my own clarity. She had inadvertently confirmed everything Sarah had observed about our family dynamic. My needs were viewed as impositions on their more important priorities. My recovery was seen as my individual responsibility rather than a family concern. Their absence during my rehabilitation wasn't explained by genuine scheduling conflicts, but by a fundamental difference in how they prioritized my well-being. Thursday afternoon arrived with the weight of inevitability. Sarah had reserved a conference room at Desert Springs for our family meeting, complete with educational materials about stroke recovery and home care requirements. My parents arrived 15 minutes late, looking professionally dressed but visibly irritated about having to attend. Jessica was another 10 minutes behind them, carrying coffee and checking her phone repeatedly. Sarah began the meeting with a comprehensive overview of my medical condition and recovery progress. She used medical terminology and statistical data to emphasize the seriousness of stroke and the typical timeline for rehabilitation. My parents listened with polite attention, but their body language suggested they were mentally elsewhere. Jessica made no effort to hide her impatience, sighing audibly when Sarah explained the potential for long-term cognitive and physical effects. The conversation shifted to practical matters of discharge planning and home care requirements. Sarah outlined the assistance I would need with daily activities, transportation to ongoing therapy appointments, medication management, and emergency support. She emphasized that stroke patients living alone had significantly higher rates of complications and setbacks compared to those with family support systems. When Sarah asked about their availability to provide assistance, the responses were telling. My father immediately began explaining his work obligations and travel schedule. My mother mentioned her responsibilities at the real estate office and her commitments to Jessica's wedding planning.
Jessica looked genuinely surprised that anyone would expect her to alter her routine to help with my recovery. Sarah listened to their explanations with professional neutrality, taking notes on her clipboard. Then she asked the question that cut through all their rationalization. Given these scheduling constraints, how do you envision supporting Marcus during his recovery period? The silence that followed was deafening. None of them had considered this question seriously enough to have an actual plan or proposal. My father finally spoke, suggesting that I hire private assistance if needed. We'd be happy to contribute financially to professional care, he said, as if money could substitute for family involvement. My mother nodded enthusiastically at this solution, clearly relieved to find a way to address my needs, without requiring their personal time or attention. Sarah's response was measured but firm. Research consistently shows that family emotional support is as important as practical assistance for stroke recovery. Patients who feel isolated or abandoned by their families have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and physical setbacks. Professional care can address practical needs, but it cannot replace family connection and involvement. She then delivered the statement that would change everything. Based on my observations over the past 7 weeks, and this conversation today, I have serious concerns about Marcus's support system. Your family has been largely absent during his rehabilitation, has shown minimal interest in his ongoing care needs, and appears to view his recovery as his individual responsibility, rather than a family concern. This level of disengagement is concerning enough that I'm required to file a report with Adult Protective Services. The reaction was immediate and explosive. My father's face flushed red with indignation. You cannot be serious, he said, his voice rising. We're a respectable family, with significant standing in this community. The suggestion that we would neglect Marcus is insulting and potentially damaging to our reputation. Jessica looked mortified. This is absolutely ridiculous, she declared. Marcus is a grown man, who can take care of himself. We're not required to put our lives on hold because he had a medical issue. Calling social services is completely inappropriate and embarrassing. My mother appeared stunned into silence, clearly processing the social implications of an APS investigation. The Rivera family name and reputation meant everything to her, and the thought of official scrutiny of their family dynamics was her worst nightmare realized. Sarah remained calm and professional throughout their outbursts. This isn't about reputation or social standing, she explained. This is about medical safety and appropriate care for a stroke patient. Adult Protective Services doesn't investigate families for being busy. They investigate situations where vulnerable individuals may not have adequate support for their safety and well-being. She continued with devastating clarity. Marcus suffered a serious stroke that could have killed him. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital with minimal family contact. During 7 weeks of rehabilitation, your visits have been sporadic and brief. You haven't participated in education about his ongoing needs. You have no plan for supporting his recovery at home. From a medical perspective, this constitutes inadequate family support for a vulnerable patient. The room fell silent as the implications of Sarah's words sank in. For the first time since my stroke, my family was being confronted by an authority figure who couldn't be dismissed or ignored. Sarah wasn't a family member they could gaslight or minimize. She was a medical professional with documentation and legal obligations, who was calling their behavior what it actually was: neglect. My father attempted to regain control of the conversation. Look, we understand that Marcus needs support, and we're willing to provide whatever assistance is reasonable. But we also have other obligations and responsibilities that can't be ignored. Surely there's a middle ground that doesn't involve social services intervention. Sarah consulted her notes and responded with clinical precision. Reasonable assistance for a stroke patient typically includes daily check-ins during the first month home, transportation to therapy appointments 3 times per week, help with grocery shopping and meal preparation, assistance with medication management, and availability for emergency situations. Which of these areas are you prepared to commit to? Again, silence. The concrete nature of the requirements made it impossible for them to offer vague promises of support. Each item on Sarah's list would require significant time and schedule adjustments that none of them seemed willing to make. Their previous offer to contribute financially suddenly seemed inadequate when confronted with the reality of what family support actually entailed. Jessica broke the silence with a question that revealed her priorities clearly. How long would we need to do all this? I mean, when will he be back to normal and able to take care of himself completely? Sarah's answer was not what she wanted to hear. Stroke recovery is typically measured in months and years, not weeks. Many patients continue to need some level of family support indefinitely, and there's always a risk of future strokes requiring additional care. The prospect of indefinite family obligations was clearly unacceptable to Jessica. Her expression showed disgust at the idea of long-term caregiving responsibilities interfering with her life plans. My parents looked equally dismayed at the timeline Sarah was describing. They had obviously assumed my recovery would be quick and complete, requiring minimal disruption to their normal routines. Sarah concluded the meeting with a clear statement of next steps. "I'll be filing my report with Adult Protective Services tomorrow morning," she announced. "They'll likely want to interview Marcus separately, and may request additional information about his living situation and family dynamics. In the meantime, we need to develop a discharge plan that ensures his safety, whether that includes family support or alternative arrangements." As my family prepared to leave, their expressions ranged from anger to embarrassment to resentment. None of them looked concerned about my well-being, or interested in addressing the issues Sarah had raised. They seemed focused entirely on the inconvenience and potential embarrassment of an APS investigation, rather than on examining their own behavior or considering changes. My father paused at the door and looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Marcus, I hope you understand that involving outsiders in family matters is going to make everything more complicated and difficult for everyone." The implication was clear. I was somehow responsible for the APS involvement, rather than their neglect being the actual cause. After they left, Sarah sat down beside me in the now empty conference room. "How are you feeling about all of this?" she asked gently. I struggled to find words for the complex emotions I was experiencing. Relief that someone had finally acknowledged the inadequacy of my family's support. Embarrassment that my family relationships had deteriorated to the point of requiring intervention. Sadness about the confirmation that I truly wasn't a priority for them. Sarah's next words were both professional and compassionate. "Marcus, I want you to know that you didn't cause this situation. You suffered a serious medical emergency and needed family support during recovery. That's completely normal and reasonable. Your family's response has been inadequate by any medical or social standard. Recognizing that isn't disloyalty, it's accepting reality so you can make appropriate plans for your well-being." That evening I called David Thompson to update him on the family meeting and APS referral. His reaction was immediate and supportive. "It's about time someone with authority called them out on their behavior," he said without hesitation. "Marcus, what they've done to you during your recovery is inexcusable. You deserved so much better, and I'm glad Sarah is taking steps to ensure you get proper support." David's unwavering support contrasted sharply with my family's defensiveness and resentment. He had been present for my recovery in ways they had refused to be, and his perspective wasn't clouded by family dynamics or social concerns. His validation of Sarah's assessment helped me realize that my expectations of family support during a medical crisis weren't unreasonable or excessive. The next morning brought a phone call from my mother that I had been expecting but dreading. "Marcus, we need to talk about this situation with the social worker," she began without pleasantries. "Your father and I are very upset about how you've portrayed our family to medical staff. We've always been supportive of you, and suggesting otherwise is hurtful and unfair." Her characterization of the situation as me portraying our family negatively revealed her inability to acknowledge their actual behavior. I hadn't complained
about them to Sarah or anyone else. The physical therapist had drawn her own conclusions based on observing their absence and disengagement over 7 weeks of my rehabilitation. The facts spoke for themselves without any interpretation or exaggeration on my part. I tried to explain that Sarah's concerns were based on her professional observations, not my complaints, but my mother interrupted with increasing agitation. "We don't need some stranger telling us how to be a family, Marcus. We know what's best for our own situation, and involving outsiders is going to cause problems for everyone. This needs to be resolved quietly before it affects your father's business or Jessica's engagement." The priorities revealed in her statement were telling. Her primary concerns were business reputation and Jessica's social standing, not my health or safety. The idea that resolving the situation quietly was more important than addressing the underlying issues showed where her loyalties truly lay. She was more worried about managing appearances than examining whether their behavior had actually been adequate. The conversation ended with my mother's demand that I contact Sarah and request that the APS report be withdrawn. When I refused, explaining that the referral was based on medical necessity rather than personal complaint, she became angry and accused me of being ungrateful and manipulative. The call ended abruptly when she hung up on me, leaving me with the clear understanding that my family viewed me as the problem rather than their behavior being the issue. That afternoon brought my first meeting with Janet Rodriguez from Adult Protective Services. She was a middle-aged woman with a kind but no-nonsense demeanor who had obviously dealt with family conflicts and medical neglect cases many times before. She interviewed me privately about my medical condition, family relationships, and support needs during recovery. Janet's questions were direct and comprehensive. She asked about the timeline of my family's involvement since my stroke, their participation in my medical care, and their plans for supporting my ongoing recovery. She reviewed Sarah's documentation and spoke with other members of my medical team to get a complete picture of my situation and needs. The interview process was emotionally difficult because it required me to acknowledge and articulate the extent of my family's abandonment during my medical crisis. Saying out loud that they had prioritized party planning over my emergency surgery, vacation relaxation over my rehabilitation, and wedding preparations over my discharge planning made the neglect sound even worse than it had felt while I was experiencing it. Janet listened without judgment, taking detailed notes and asking follow-up questions that helped her understand the full scope of the situation. At the end of our meeting, she explained the next steps in the investigation process. She would be interviewing my family members separately, reviewing my medical records and discharge planning documents, and potentially conducting a home visit to assess my living situation and safety concerns. The APS investigation would take several weeks to complete, during which time I would remain at Desert Springs until adequate support arrangements could be established. Janet emphasized that the goal wasn't to punish my family, but to ensure I had appropriate assistance for safe recovery. If my family was willing and able to provide adequate support, that would be the preferred outcome. If not, alternative arrangements would need to be made. As Janet prepared to leave, she made a statement that would stay with me long after our meeting ended. "Marcus, I want you to know that expecting family support during a serious medical crisis isn't unreasonable or demanding. It's one of the most basic forms of love and care that families provide for each other. If your family isn't able or willing to provide that support, it's important information for you to have as you plan your recovery and your future relationships." Her words gave me permission to stop making excuses for my family's behavior and to start accepting the reality of our relationship dynamic. They had shown me clearly where I ranked in their priorities, and that information was painful but valuable for making decisions about my own life and well-being going forward. The Adult Protective Services investigation unfolded over the following 3 weeks with a thoroughness that surprised both me and my family. Janet Rodriguez conducted separate interviews with my parents and Jessica, each lasting over an hour and covering their understanding of my medical condition, their involvement in my care, and their plans for ongoing support. The sessions were mandatory, and their attempts to reschedule or minimize the process were met with firm professional boundaries that they couldn't manipulate or dismiss. My father's interview, according to Janet's subsequent report, revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of stroke recovery and family obligations. He had characterized my condition as a temporary setback that required minimal intervention, comparing it to recovering from a broken bone or minor surgery. When presented with medical documentation about the severity of my stroke and ongoing rehabilitation needs, he expressed surprise and claimed that medical staff had never explained the long-term implications clearly. Janet's notes indicated that my father seemed genuinely unaware of the extent of my ongoing challenges, not because the information hadn't been provided, but because he hadn't been present for medical consultations or family education sessions. His absence during crucial conversations meant he was operating on assumptions rather than actual medical information. However, his lack of knowledge was self-imposed rather than the result of medical staff failing to communicate adequately. My mother's interview focused heavily on competing priorities and time management challenges. She had presented detailed schedules showing her commitments to Jessica's wedding planning, the real estate business, and various social obligations. Janet's report noted that while my mother could account for every hour of her time over the past 2 months, virtually none of that time had been allocated to my medical care or recovery support. When Janet asked my mother to explain her priorities during my medical crisis, the response was revealing. My mother had argued that Jessica's engagement party couldn't be postponed because of the financial deposits, vendor commitments, and social expectations involved. She seemed genuinely unable to understand why a party, even an expensive and elaborate one, should be considered less important than her son's medical emergency and rehabilitation. Jessica's interview was the most concerning from Janet's perspective. Unlike my parents, who at least expressed some guilt about their limited involvement, Jessica showed no recognition that her behavior during my medical crisis had been inadequate. She maintained that my stroke was my individual health problem that shouldn't impact her life plans or require sacrifices from family members. Janet's documentation showed that Jessica had described my expectations of family support as manipulative and attention-seeking. She had suggested that I was exaggerating my ongoing challenges to gain sympathy and avoid returning to normal responsibilities. Most troubling, Jessica had indicated that she found my medical condition embarrassing and inconvenient, particularly as it interfered with her engagement celebrations and wedding planning timeline. The home assessment that Janet conducted at my Tempe apartment confirmed Sarah's safety concerns about my living situation. The second-floor location with no elevator would be problematic for someone with balance and mobility issues. The kitchen layout required extensive reaching and lifting that would be difficult with left-side weakness. The bathroom lacked safety features like grab bars or shower seating that would be necessary for someone with my limitations. More significantly, Janet's assessment revealed the complete absence of any family support infrastructure. My emergency contact list still showed my parents and Jessica, but interviews confirmed they wouldn't be available for urgent situations during business hours or social events. There were no spare keys, no planned check-in schedule, no arrangements for transportation to medical appointments, and no emergency response plan for potential complications. The investigation culminated in a formal report that Janet shared with me before submitting to her supervisors and my medical team. The document was comprehensive and damning, detailing a pattern of family neglect that had persisted throughout my medical crisis and rehabilitation. The clinical language couldn't soften the harsh reality of what my family's behavior looked like from an objective, professional perspective. Janet's conclusions were unambiguous. My family had failed to provide adequate support during a serious medical emergency and ongoing recovery period. Their absence during crucial weeks of rehabilitation, lack of participation in discharge planning, and unwillingness to commit to ongoing assistance constituted neglect of a vulnerable adult. The report recommended continued protective oversight until adequate support systems could be established. The recommendations section of the report offered my family one final opportunity to address their behavior and commit to appropriate involvement in my recovery. They could attend family counseling sessions focused on understanding stroke recovery and developing realistic support plans. They could participate in caregiver training to learn about my ongoing needs and how to assist effectively. They could work with my medical team to create schedules that balance their other obligations with necessary family responsibilities. Alternatively, if my family remained unwilling or unable to provide adequate support, the report recommended exploring assisted living arrangements, professional in-home care services, or other protective interventions to ensure my safety and well-being. The choice was theirs, but the status quo of neglect and abandonment was no longer acceptable from a medical or legal standpoint. The formal presentation of Janet's findings to my family occurred during a meeting at Desert Springs that included my medical team, APS representatives, and a patient advocate. The atmosphere was tense from the moment my parents and Jessica arrived, clearly resentful about the continued scrutiny and formal intervention in what they considered private family matters. Dr. Martinez began the meeting by reviewing my medical condition and recovery progress, emphasizing both the achievements I had made and the ongoing challenges that would require long-term support. His presentation was factual and professional, but the implications were clear. My stroke recovery was not a temporary inconvenience, but a permanent change that would affect my life indefinitely. Sarah Chen presented her observations and concerns about family involvement, using specific examples and documentation that made it impossible for my family to dispute the facts. She noted their absence during crucial periods, their lack of participation in educational sessions, and their apparent unwillingness to adjust their schedules to accommodate my medical needs. Janet Rodriguez then presented her investigation findings, reading selected portions of the formal report that detailed the pattern of neglect and inadequate support. The clinical language was devastating in its clarity, describing behaviors that my family had rationalized as reasonable but that professional standards deemed unacceptable. The presentation concluded with a clear ultimatum. My family could commit immediately to specific measurable support responsibilities, or alternative care arrangements would be implemented without their input. The vague promises and general expressions of willingness that had characterized their previous responses were no longer acceptable. Concrete commitments with timelines and accountability measures were required. My father's response revealed the depth of his misunderstanding about both my condition and their obligations. He suggested that hiring professional assistance would be more efficient than family involvement, apparently believing that money could substitute for emotional support and personal commitment. When Janet explained that research consistently showed the importance of family engagement for recovery outcomes, he seemed genuinely surprised by the information. My mother's reaction focused on the social implications of the APS investigation rather than the medical issues that had prompted it. She was primarily concerned about how the situation might affect their reputation in the community and Jessica's wedding plans. The idea that my health and safety should take priority over social considerations seemed foreign to her thinking. Jessica's response was the most revealing and disappointing. She argued that my stroke was an unfortunate event that shouldn't be allowed to derail her life plans or impose unreasonable burdens on the family. She seemed to view my ongoing needs as a form of manipulation designed to gain attention and sympathy during what should have been her special time as an engaged woman planning her wedding. When pressed for specific commitments to support my recovery, none of them could provide concrete answers. They offered vague promises to help when possible and suggested that professional care would be more appropriate for my needs. Their unwillingness to commit to specific responsibilities or schedule adjustments made it clear that they had no intention of significantly changing their behavior or priorities. The meeting concluded with my medical team and APS representatives making the decision to extend my stay at Desert Springs while alternative support arrangements were developed. My family would not be involved in discharge planning or ongoing care coordination. Professional services would be arranged to address my practical needs, while I would work with counselors to develop emotional support systems that didn't depend on family involvement. The aftermath of the formal meeting brought a period of strange relief mixed with profound sadness. Relief because the pretense was finally over. My family's priorities had been clearly established, and I no longer needed to make excuses for their behavior or hold out hope for change. Sadness because the confirmation of their neglect meant accepting that the loving, supportive family I had always wanted simply didn't exist. David Thompson remained my most consistent supporter throughout this process, attending meetings when permitted and helping to coordinate the practical aspects of my transition to independent living with professional support. His dedication contrasted sharply with my family's absence and highlighted what genuine care and commitment looked like when freely given. Mrs. Gonzalez, my elderly neighbor, also played an unexpected role in my support system. When she learned about the APS investigation and my family's response, she offered to serve as an emergency contact and check in person once I returned home. Her simple kindness and practical assistance meant more to me than the expensive but impersonal gifts my family had occasionally brought during their brief visits. The extended rehabilitation period allowed me to work with counselors and social workers on developing coping strategies for navigating life with limited family support. These sessions were initially painful, as they required acknowledging the full extent of my family's emotional abandonment and the impact it had on my recovery and future planning. However, the counseling also introduced me to concepts about chosen family and building support networks based on mutual care rather than biological obligation. I learned about other stroke survivors who had created meaningful communities of support that were more reliable and nurturing than their biological families had ever been. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the counselor assigned to work with me during this period, helped me understand that my family's behavior reflected their own limitations and priorities rather than my worth as a person. Their inability to provide appropriate support during my medical crisis was information about them, not evidence of my failure to deserve love and care. Through our sessions, I began to recognize patterns in my family relationships that extended far beyond my stroke recovery. The favoritism toward Jessica, the dismissal of my health concerns, and the expectation that I accommodate their priorities while receiving minimal consideration in return had been consistent themes throughout my life. My stroke had simply brought these dynamics into sharp focus by creating a situation where my needs were urgent and unavoidable. The realization was both liberating and heartbreaking.
Liberating because it freed me from the exhausting cycle of trying to earn their attention and approval. Heartbreaking because it meant accepting that the family relationships I had always hoped for were never going to materialize, regardless of my efforts or achievements. As my discharge date approached, the alternative support systems that had been arranged began to take shape. Professional home health services would provide assistance with daily activities during my initial transition home. Transportation services would ensure I could attend ongoing therapy appointments. A medical alert system would provide emergency response capabilities for potential complications. More importantly, I had begun building genuine connections with people who valued my well-being without conditions or competing priorities. Sarah Chen had become more than just my physical therapist. She was someone who had advocated for my needs when my own family wouldn't. David Thompson had proven himself to be a true friend whose support wasn't dependent on convenience or social obligations. The stroke support group I joined during my final weeks at Desert Springs introduced me to others who had navigated similar medical challenges and family dynamics. Many of them had discovered that chosen family relationships were more sustaining and reliable than biological connections that existed primarily out of obligation rather than genuine care. My discharge from Desert Springs Rehabilitation Facility occurred on a crisp October morning, exactly 3 months after my stroke. The timing was symbolic in ways I was only beginning to appreciate. 3 months earlier, I had been a man who organized his life around trying to earn his family's approval and attention. I was leaving the facility as someone who understood that my worth wasn't determined by their recognition and that my happiness didn't depend on their involvement. My parents and Jessica did not attend my discharge. They sent a floral arrangement with a generic get-well card that arrived the day before I left the facility. The flowers were beautiful but impersonal, ordered from an expensive florist but requiring no personal effort or thought. The gesture perfectly encapsulated our relationship, expensive but hollow, appropriate in appearance but lacking genuine substance. David Thompson was there to drive me home, along with Mrs. Gonzalez, who had prepared a welcome home meal for my first evening back in my apartment. Sarah Chen stopped by to check on my transition and ensure the home health services were properly coordinated. These people, who had no biological obligation to care about my well-being, had created a support system that was more reliable and nurturing than anything my family had ever provided. The months following my discharge brought continued progress in my physical recovery and significant growth in my emotional independence. Physical therapy sessions, 3 times per week, gradually restored much of my strength and mobility. Speech therapy helped address the remaining cognitive challenges that affected my concentration and memory. Occupational therapy taught me adaptive strategies for managing daily activities with my ongoing limitations. More importantly, I began building a life that didn't revolve around my family's approval or attention. I joined community organizations for stroke survivors, volunteered with literacy programs that utilized my insurance industry experience, and developed friendships with people who valued my company rather than tolerated my presence. The holidays brought the first real test of my new boundaries and priorities. My mother called in November to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner at Jessica and Andrew's new home. The invitation was extended casually, as if the previous months of investigation and intervention had never occurred. She seemed to expect that I would simply resume participating in family gatherings without addressing the underlying issues or acknowledging what had transpired. I declined the invitation politely but firmly. I explained that I had made other plans and wouldn't be able to attend. My mother's response revealed that she had learned nothing from the APS investigation or professional feedback about their behavior. She accused me of being dramatic and holding grudges, suggesting that I was punishing the family for imaginary slights rather than protecting myself from further neglect. Instead of spending Thanksgiving trying to earn my family's attention while they focused on Jessica and Andrew's wedding plans, I joined David Thompson's family celebration in Flagstaff. His parents welcomed me warmly, including me in their traditions and treating me as an honored guest rather than an afterthought. The contrast with my own family gatherings was stark and illuminating. Christmas brought similar invitations and similar declined responses. My family seemed unable to understand that their behavior during my medical crisis had fundamentally changed our relationship dynamic. They appeared to expect that I would simply forget their abandonment and return to the status quo of being available for their convenience while accepting minimal consideration in return. The new year brought news that Jessica and Andrew had set their wedding date for the following October, exactly 1 year after my discharge from rehabilitation. My mother called to inform me about the date and assume my participation in wedding festivities. When I indicated that I would need to consider my availability and commitments before making decisions about wedding-related events, she was genuinely shocked by my response. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of my family's inability to recognize how their behavior had affected our relationships. My mother seemed to believe that my stroke recovery was now complete and that I should be grateful for their minimal support during my medical crisis. The idea that their actions had consequences for our ongoing relationship was apparently beyond her comprehension. Spring brought my one-year anniversary of the stroke, a milestone that my medical team celebrated as evidence of successful recovery and adaptation. My physical limitations had stabilized at a manageable level. My cognitive function had largely returned to normal. My emotional resilience had grown significantly through counseling and community connections. Most importantly, I had learned to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and hope for eventual recognition. The chosen family I had created through friendships, community involvement, and professional relationships was more supportive and reliable than my biological family had ever been. The contrast became especially clear when David Thompson experienced his own medical emergency in late spring. He was diagnosed with a serious condition requiring surgery and extended recovery time. Without hesitation, I rearranged my schedule to provide transportation, meal preparation, and emotional support during his treatment and rehabilitation. The experience of caring for someone who had cared for me revealed how natural and fulfilling genuine reciprocal relationships could be. Supporting David felt meaningful and important because our friendship was based on mutual value and respect. The effort required didn't feel like a burden because it was freely chosen rather than demanded or expected. Summer brought the final contact from my family that would definitively end our relationship. Jessica called to demand my participation in her bachelorette party and various wedding-related events. When I explained that my schedule was full with other commitments, she became angry and accused me of being selfish and vindictive. The conversation escalated when Jessica suggested that I was using my stroke as an excuse to avoid family obligations and seek attention. Her complete failure to understand the impact of their behavior during my medical crisis, combined with her ongoing expectation that I accommodate her priorities while receiving nothing in return, made it clear that no genuine change in our family dynamics was possible. I ended the conversation by explaining that I would not be participating in her wedding festivities and would prefer no further contact from any family members. The decision was met with outrage and accusations of cruelty, but I maintained my boundaries despite their emotional manipulation attempts. Fall brought Jessica's wedding, which occurred without my attendance or involvement. Through social media posts from distant relatives, I saw images of the elaborate celebration that had been prioritized over my medical emergency and recovery. The contrast between their investment in party planning versus their neglect of my health needs remained stark and unforgivable. More importantly, fall brought my own celebration of recovery and independence. I organized a small gathering to mark the anniversary of my discharge from rehabilitation and to thank the people who had supported my journey. David Thompson, Sarah Chen, Mrs. Gonzalez, and several friends from my support groups joined me for an evening of gratitude and reflection. The gathering was everything my family's celebrations had never been: genuine, warm, focused on meaningful connections rather than social obligations. These people had chosen to be part of my life and had proven their commitment through actions rather than empty promises. They represented the family I had created for myself based on shared values and mutual care. 2 years after my stroke, I had built a life that was fuller and more satisfying than anything I had experienced while trying to earn my biological family's approval. My career had recovered and advanced beyond my pre-stroke position. My health was well managed through ongoing medical care and lifestyle modifications. My relationships were based on genuine connection rather than obligation or hope for eventual recognition. Most importantly, I had learned that worth isn't determined by family recognition, and that love can be found in chosen relationships that honor and value who you truly are. The stroke that had initially seemed like a devastating setback had ultimately become the catalyst for creating a life authentic to my own values and needs. The choice to prioritize my well-being over my family's convenience had been difficult but necessary. Their inability to provide adequate support during my medical crisis had revealed the true nature of our relationships and forced me to seek connections that were more genuine and reliable.
Losing my biological family, I had gained the freedom to create relationships that truly mattered. 3 years later, when my father experienced his own stroke, I received a call from the hospital asking about family support and involvement. I explained calmly that we were estranged and that I would not be participating in his care or recovery. The medical staff seemed surprised by my response, but I felt no guilt about applying the same standards to them that they had applied to me. The experience had taught me that family is defined by actions rather than genetics, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop accepting treatment that diminishes your worth and well-being. My stroke recovery had given me more than just physical healing. It had given me the clarity and courage to demand the respect and care that every person deserves from the people who claim to love them. 5 years have passed since that Tuesday morning when my world changed forever in a conference room at Southwestern Insurance Solutions. As I sit in my new office overlooking the Phoenix skyline, watching the desert sunset paint Camelback Mountain in shades of amber and rose, I often reflect on the journey that brought me to this moment. The man I am today bears little resemblance to the person who spent 32 years chasing approval that would never come, accepting crumbs of attention while watching others feast on unconditional love. My professional life has flourished in ways I never imagined possible during those dark early months of recovery. 2 years after my stroke, I was approached by a boutique consulting firm specializing in risk management for healthcare organizations. My unique perspective as both an insurance professional and a stroke survivor made me an invaluable asset in helping medical facilities understand the intersection of patient care and liability protection. The work was meaningful in ways my previous position had never been, allowing me to use my experience to improve care for other patients facing medical crises. Last year, I took the leap into entrepreneurship, establishing Rivera Risk Consulting with a focus on healthcare system optimization and patient advocacy integration. The irony of finally using the Rivera name for professional success, completely independent of my family's business empire, wasn't lost on me. My company now employs 12 people and has contracts with major hospital systems throughout the Southwest. The success feels different from any achievement I experienced while seeking my family's validation because it's built on my own merit and vision, rather than desperate attempts to prove my worth. The physical reminders of my stroke have largely faded into background awareness rather than daily obstacles. My left side strength has returned to about 90% of normal function, though I still experience occasional fatigue during periods of high stress or inadequate sleep. The cognitive challenges that initially seemed so devastating have resolved almost completely, leaving me with perhaps even sharper analytical skills than I possessed before the stroke. My neurologist, Dr. Williams, attributes this improvement to the intensive rehabilitation work and the reduction of chronic stress that came from finally establishing healthy boundaries in my personal relationships. Sarah Chen remains not just my former physical therapist but one of my closest friends and professional colleagues. She left Desert Springs 2 years ago to establish her own practice specializing in stroke rehabilitation, and Rivera Risk Consulting now partners with her clinic to provide comprehensive recovery planning services. Our professional relationship has evolved into a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to improving outcomes for stroke survivors and their families. The work we do together has expanded beyond individual patient care to include family education programs and systemic advocacy for better support protocols. Sarah's experience with my family's neglect during my recovery wasn't unique, and we've discovered that inadequate family support is a more common problem than most medical professionals realize. Our collaboration has resulted in several published research papers about the correlation between family engagement and recovery outcomes, work that has influenced policy changes in rehabilitation facilities throughout Arizona. David Thompson and I have maintained our friendship across the geographical distance that developed when he relocated to Colorado for career advancement 3 years ago. His unwavering support during my medical crisis and recovery created a bond that transcends typical workplace relationships. We speak weekly and visit each other several times per year, with our families now including each other in major life celebrations and significant milestones. David married his longtime girlfriend Maria 2 years ago, and I had the honor of serving as his best man. The wedding was a beautiful celebration of authentic love and commitment, attended by people who genuinely cared about the couple's happiness rather than social obligations or appearance management. Standing beside David as he exchanged vows, I was struck by the contrast with my family's approach to relationships, where appearances and social benefits seem to matter more than genuine emotional connection. Mrs. Patricia Gonzalez remains my honorary grandmother and closest neighbor despite my move to a larger apartment in a more accessible building designed for people with mobility considerations. I visit her weekly for homemade meals and conversation that ranges from neighborhood gossip to philosophical discussions about family, loyalty, and the meaning of home. Her practical wisdom and unconditional acceptance provided a model for healthy relationships that I had never experienced within my biological family. When Mrs. Gonzalez was hospitalized for pneumonia last winter, I coordinated her care, managed her household needs, and provided daily companionship during her recovery. The experience reinforced my understanding of what genuine family relationships look like: mutual support freely given rather than grudgingly provided, concern for well-being that transcends personal convenience, and love demonstrated through actions rather than empty words. The stroke survivor support group I joined during my rehabilitation has evolved into a chosen family of extraordinary people who understand resilience, adaptation, and the importance of authentic connection. We celebrate recovery milestones together, support each other through setbacks, and have created a network of practical and emotional assistance that rivals any biological family bond. Several group members have become close personal friends, whose wisdom and companionship enrich my life immeasurably. Through this community, I met Elena Martinez, a speech therapist who had survived her own stroke 5 years before mine. Our relationship developed slowly from friendship to romance, built on shared understanding of life's fragility and the importance of choosing relationships that honor your authentic self. Elena brings joy, intelligence, and emotional depth to my life that I never thought possible during my years of seeking approval from people incapable of providing genuine love. Our relationship is everything my family relationships never were: reciprocal, supportive, based on mutual respect rather than obligation or social expectation. Elena celebrates my successes without needing them to reflect well on her. She supports me during challenges without viewing my needs as inconvenient burdens. Most importantly, she loves me for who I am rather than who she wants me to become or how I can serve her interests. Elena and I became engaged 6 months ago during a hiking trip to Sedona, the same location where my family had vacationed to recover from the stress of Jessica's engagement party, while I fought for my life in rehabilitation. The symbolism of reclaiming that space for genuine celebration, rather than escape from family obligations, felt powerfully appropriate. Our engagement represents the culmination of building a life based on authentic connection rather than biological accident. The contrast between my engagement experience and what I observed of Jessica's wedding planning couldn't be more stark. Elena and I are planning a small, meaningful celebration focused on our commitment to each other and the community of chosen family we've created together. There's no social posturing, no business networking opportunities, no pressure to impress people whose opinions don't matter to our actual happiness. My contact with my biological family ended definitively 3 years ago, though I occasionally hear updates through distant relatives or family friends who seem puzzled by our estrangement. Jessica and Andrew divorced 18 months after their elaborate wedding, apparently due to his gambling addiction and her inability to manage the financial responsibilities that came with marriage. The irony of their relationship failing despite all the family investment and social celebration wasn't lost on me, though I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties. My parents' real estate business has faced significant challenges in recent years due to market changes and my father's declining health following his own stroke. They've attempted to reach out several times, apparently hoping I might be willing to provide business consultation or personal support during their difficulties. Each contact attempt has been politely but firmly declined, with clear explanations that our relationship ended when they prioritized party planning over my medical emergency. The requests for renewed contact always focus on what I can provide them rather than acknowledging the harm their behavior caused or expressing genuine interest in my well-being. Their approach to reconciliation reflects the same self-centered thinking that characterized their response to my stroke, viewing me as a resource to be utilized rather than a person deserving of consideration and respect. Jessica's most recent attempt at contact came through a mutual cousin who suggested I should forgive and forget because family is the most important thing in life. The irony of that message coming from someone who had demonstrated through actions that family was actually far down her priority list was remarkable. My response was simple and direct. Family is indeed important, which is exactly why I've chosen to invest my energy in relationships with people who actually treat me like family. The professional success I've achieved has brought opportunities for public speaking about stroke recovery, family dynamics, and building resilience after medical trauma. These speaking engagements often include questions about forgiveness and reconciliation, with audience members struggling to understand how someone can choose to remain estranged from biological family members. My response has evolved over the years from defensive explanations to confident clarity about healthy boundary setting. Forgiveness doesn't require continued relationship with people who refuse to acknowledge harm or change destructive behaviors. Loving yourself sometimes means refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth and well-being. Family relationships should be sources of support and encouragement, not ongoing sources of disappointment and emotional exhaustion. The most meaningful aspect of my recovery journey has been the opportunity to help other stroke survivors navigate similar family challenges. Through Rivera Risk Consulting and my volunteer work with support organizations, I've encountered dozens of patients whose families responded to medical crises with varying degrees of inadequacy, neglect, or outright abandonment. The pattern is more common than most people realize: families who are unprepared for the reality of serious illness, relationships that can't withstand the stress of caregiving responsibilities, people who reveal their true priorities when faced with genuine crisis rather than social obligations. Many stroke survivors struggle with guilt and self-blame when family members fail to provide adequate support, wondering what they did wrong or how they could have earned better treatment. My experience has taught me that family behavior during medical crises reveals existing relationship dynamics rather than creating new ones. People who truly love and value you will find ways to provide support even when it's inconvenient or challenging. People who view you as peripheral to their real priorities will treat your medical needs as interruptions to their more important concerns. The work I do now, helping other patients and families navigate these challenges, feels like the most important contribution I can make with my stroke experience. Teaching people to recognize the difference between genuine support and performative concern, helping them develop realistic expectations for family involvement, and supporting them in building alternative networks when biological families prove inadequate, has become a passion that gives meaning to the difficulties I experienced. Elena and I are planning to establish a foundation focused on family support education and alternative network development for stroke survivors. The foundation will provide resources for patients whose families are unable or unwilling to provide adequate assistance, offering practical support services and emotional counseling for those navigating recovery without traditional family involvement. The foundation will also develop educational programs for families about the realities of stroke recovery and the importance of sustained engagement throughout the rehabilitation process. Many families, like mine, simply don't understand what genuine support looks like or how their behavior affects recovery outcomes. Education and clear expectations might prevent some of the abandonment and neglect that currently occurs too frequently. Our wedding is planned for next spring, 5 years after my stroke and exactly 6 years after Jessica's elaborate celebration that my family prioritized over my medical emergency. The timing feels symbolic of how completely my life has transformed from those dark days when I measured my worth by their approval and acceptance. Elena and I will be surrounded by people who have chosen to be part of our lives and have proven their commitment through actions rather than obligations. Sarah Chen will officiate the ceremony, David Thompson will serve as my best man despite the travel distance, and Mrs. Gonzalez will have the honor of escorting me down the aisle as the grandmother figure who provided unconditional love when my biological family proved incapable of genuine care. The guest list represents the chosen family I've built through shared values, mutual support, and authentic connection. Stroke survivors from my support group, colleagues who have become close friends, neighbors who have provided practical assistance and emotional encouragement, and Elena's family members who have welcomed me warmly into their circle of love and acceptance. The contrast with traditional family weddings, where guest lists are determined by obligation rather than affection, feels liberating and appropriate. Every person attending our celebration will be there because they genuinely care about our happiness and want to witness our commitment to each other. There will be no social posturing, no business networking, no attendance motivated by duty rather than joy. My bachelor party, organized by David and my stroke survivor friends, will be a hiking trip through the Grand Canyon, followed by a quiet dinner celebrating friendship and authentic connection. The activities reflect who I actually am rather than social expectations about masculine celebration. The guest list includes people who know my real personality and interests, rather than performing for people whose approval doesn't matter to my actual happiness. The financial independence I've achieved through my business success has eliminated any lingering connection to my family's resources or approval. Rivera Risk Consulting generates more income than I ever earned in my previous insurance position, and the work is infinitely more meaningful and satisfying. The professional recognition I receive comes from colleagues and clients who value my expertise and perspective rather than people obligated to acknowledge my achievements. More importantly, the emotional independence I've developed through therapy, authentic relationships, and healthy boundary setting has freed me from the exhausting cycle of seeking validation from people incapable of providing genuine recognition. My self-worth is no longer dependent on family approval or social status, but on my own values, achievements, and the quality of relationships I've chosen to cultivate. The health monitoring that continues as part of my ongoing stroke prevention includes regular checkups with Dr. Williams, medication management, and lifestyle modifications that have become second nature rather than burdensome restrictions. My blood pressure remains well controlled, my cholesterol levels are excellent, and my overall cardiovascular health is better than it was before my stroke, due to improved diet, regular exercise, and dramatically reduced stress levels. The stress reduction came primarily from eliminating the constant anxiety of trying to earn family approval and managing their disappointment when I failed to meet their shifting expectations. The relief of no longer walking on eggshells around people who viewed my needs as inconvenient burdens has had measurable positive effects on my physical health as well as my emotional well-being. Elena often comments on how peaceful and content I seem compared to the descriptions I've shared of my pre-stroke life. The person I was 5 years ago, desperately trying to prove his worth to people who had already decided he wasn't a priority, feels like a stranger when I reflect on those patterns now. The stroke that initially seemed like a devastating setback ultimately became the catalyst for discovering my authentic self and building relationships that honor that reality. The anniversary of my stroke has become a celebration rather than a somber remembrance. Elena and I spend the day hiking in the desert, reflecting on resilience, growth, and the unexpected gifts that can emerge from life's most challenging experiences. The date reminds me not of what I lost in terms of physical capability or family relationships, but of what I gained in terms of clarity, authentic connection, and the courage to demand the respect and care that every person deserves. Looking toward the future, I see possibilities that extend far beyond the limited horizon I accepted during my years of seeking family approval. Elena and I are considering starting a family of our own, creating the kind of loving, supportive environment that neither of us experienced in our biological families. The idea of raising children who will know from birth that they are valued and loved unconditionally feels like the ultimate expression of the lessons I've learned about what family really means. Our children, if we're blessed with them, will grow up understanding that love is demonstrated through actions rather than proclaimed through words. They'll see examples of healthy relationships based on mutual respect, genuine concern for each other's well-being, and support that doesn't depend on convenience or social obligation. Most importantly, they'll learn that their worth isn't determined by other people's recognition, but by their own character, values, and treatment of others. The stroke survivor community we're part of has become extended family for both Elena and me, providing examples of resilience, wisdom, and authentic connection that enrich our lives immeasurably. These relationships, forged through shared challenge and mutual support, demonstrate daily what genuine family bonds look like when they're based on choice rather than obligation. Professional colleagues, neighborhood friends, chosen family members, and romantic partnership have created a support network that is more reliable, nurturing, and sustainable than anything I experienced during 32 years of biological family relationships. The quality of these connections validates my decision to prioritize relationships that honor my authentic self rather than accepting treatment that diminishes my worth and well-being. As I prepare for marriage to Elena and continue building Rivera Risk Consulting into a company that makes meaningful differences in healthcare and patient advocacy, I'm grateful for the stroke that forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics and personal worth. The medical emergency that initially seemed catastrophic ultimately became the beginning of the most authentic and fulfilling period of my life. The family that abandoned me during my medical crisis taught me everything I needed to know about their priorities and values. The chosen family I've built since then has shown me what love, support, and genuine connection actually look like when freely given rather than grudgingly provided. Sometimes the greatest gift difficult experiences can offer is the clarity to distinguish between relationships that nourish your soul and those that diminish your spirit. 5 years later, I can say with complete certainty that choosing to prioritize my own well-being over family approval was the best decision I've ever made. The stroke that could have killed me instead gave me the life I was always meant to live: authentic, purposeful, surrounded by people who value me for who I truly am, rather than who they want me to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.